On the 6th of June 2025, protests broke out when federal agents combed through a garment district in Los Angeles. They searched for undocumented immigrants. This was part of the Trump administration's crackdown on immigration. Focusing on raiding workplaces, protesters threw eggs as law enforcement officers unleashed pepper spray and rubber bullets. After 2 days of protests by hundreds of demonstrators against the immigration raids, U.S. President Donald Trump deployed National Guard troops to California, saying the protests interfered with federal law enforcement. He termed them a form of rebellion against the U.S. authority. More than 2,000 troops were sent in to quell protests. California Governor Gavin Newsom hit out at President Trump's move and announced that his office would take legal action against the president. Donald Trump is putting fuel on this fire. Commandeering a state's National Guard without consulting the governor of that state is illegal and immoral. California will be taking him to court. He further accused Trump of manufacturing the crisis. Trump hit back and said that he did speak to Newsom to control the situation on the 7th of June and provided a screenshot to an American media house. Several cities across the United States joined Los Angeles in protesting against the anti-immigration crackdown.
We don't have kids. You know the police on you, nothing on you local 888.
As the protests grew in LA, about 700 Marines were also brought in. They assembled in a staging area in the Seal Beach, about 50 kilometers south of the city, awaiting deployment to specific locations. So why does Trump want to crack down on immigration? Is Trump permitted to send troops to stop the Los Angeles protests? Where are the largest immigrant communities in the U.S.? How much do immigrants contribute to the U.S. economy? Do immigrants increase crime in the U.S.? All this and more on this week's WION Wideangle. On the 8th of June, protesters gathered in downtown Los Angeles as well as nearby cities. This was in response to a series of deportation raids in areas of the city with large immigrant populations. Dozens of people were arrested in Los Angeles after days of violent protests. The clash came after agents from Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, and other federal law enforcement agencies raided several locations in Southern California, which sparked mass protests.
We're here protesting for our families that are being separated in our neighborhoods, and we want justice.
Now they know that they cannot go anywhere in this country where our people are and try to kidnap our workers, our people. For every single minute that we were here resisting against the Border Patrol, that was time that they were not out deporting people in our community. They could not kidnap people in our community today because the people came out to resist.
Beautiful to see everybody come out together and stand against it, and I think we need to continue doing that.
Look at this eyewitness footage from LA. It shows what appears to be an immigration enforcement operation at a business involving unmarked vans and armed personnel in military-style uniforms. A handcuffed man is led to an unmarked van during one such raid. Dozens of people across the city are reported to have been taken into custody during federal immigration raids.
We are federal law enforcement officers executing a lawful criminal search warrant. It was signed and approved by a federal judge. We are repeating our duties as federal law enforcement officers and preventing us from carrying out our official and lawful duty. If you do not disperse immediately, you're arrested and charged with a crime.
Washington vowed to continue the raids despite opposition from local communities and officials. U.S. President Donald Trump deployed more than 2,000 National Guard troops to the city, triggering a political row. He also condemned what he called violent insurrectionist mobs. Demonstrators took to the streets in Los Angeles, calling for the withdrawal of National Guard troops, arguing their arrival would only escalate tensions. In downtown Los Angeles, protesters faced off with National Guard soldiers in front of a detention center, where the detained immigrants were knocking on windows. Tensions rose as police officers used tear gas and rubber bullets to disperse the crowd, leading to several arrests.
The LAPD moving in on horseback, firing rubber bullets at protesters, moving them on through the heart of LA.
You just shut the You okay?
Y'all told us to come here for opportunity. We came, and then now it's like, oh, you have to leave. But when I was the working class, y'all loved me, right? But now that we're too many people, what's the issue?
It's a fight for our community. LA wouldn't be what it is without us. There was no need for it. I'm a victim of the fires in Altadena, and they didn't help at all. They didn't even let us go back to our home.
The protests began after it emerged that Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, officers were carrying out raids in areas of the city with prominent Latino populations. Raids were stepped up after Trump returned to the White House and pledged to crack down on illegal immigration. As word of the raids spread, demonstrators began to gather in downtown Los Angeles and nearby cities. The Trump administration denounced the protesters as rioters, accused them of attacking ICE officers and other federal agents.
People with big, heavy hammers pounding the concrete and pounding curbs, pounding it, breaking up, and handing these big chunks of concrete to people. And they were taking that concrete, going up on bridges and dropping it into the roof of a car. They were throwing it at our police. They were throwing it at our soldiers that are there. And we got it stopped, and we have them in custody right now.
Trump invoked a law aimed at quelling domestic unrest to mobilize 2,000 members of the California National Guard to intervene. He said in his executive order that the unrest was prohibiting the execution of immigration enforcement and therefore met the definition of a rebellion. About 300 troops had arrived by the 8th of June to protect federal property and personnel. So, what is the National Guard? The National Guard serves as a hybrid entity that operates under both state and federal authority. The National Guard is the only branch of the military that can be deployed both by state governors and the president. Governors almost always control deployments in their states. The role of the National Guard is to protect federal agents, including ICE and the Department of Homeland Security, or DHS personnel, as they carry out their duties. The troops will not be conducting their own immigration raids or performing regular policing, which remains the role of the Los Angeles Police Department. The Guard operates like the Army's reserve force. Most of its members do not serve full-time. They generally hold civilian jobs and attend regular training sessions and are called into active service only when needed. It is most often called upon during extreme weather events like hurricanes, floods, and wildfires. The law generally prohibits domestic use of federal troops for civilian law enforcement, outside for some exceptions like the Insurrection Act. Typically, a state's force is activated at the request of the governor. Trump circumvented that by invoking a rarely used federal law, arguing that the protests constituted a form of rebellion against the authority of the government of the United States. This is reportedly the first time in about 60 years that a president has federalized the National Guard without a state's consent. Last it was activated without the request of the state's governor was in 1965. Trump's move has been condemned by California Governor Gavin Newsom and LA Mayor Karen Bass, who said they believed local police could have handled the situation. Newsom accused Trump of an illegal act that was putting fuel on this fire and has threatened to sue. Trump invoked a section of the U.S. Code that allows the president to bypass a governor's authority over the National Guard and call those troops into federal service when he considers it necessary to repel an invasion or suppress a rebellion.
Presidents do have this authority. It sort of stems from the commander-in-chief power, but there's actually a specific law, which is Title 10 of the U.S. Code on Armed Services, which says there can be federal deployment of National Guard forces if there is a rebellion or danger of a rebellion against the authority of the government of the United States. So, of course, this is in the eye of the beholder, but the notion here would be that these protests, which did not seem to be rebellious in nature or violent, but the idea is that these protests mark a rebellion or danger of a rebellion against the authority of the United States.
Trump cited Title 10 of the U.S. Code, a federal law that outlines the role of the U.S. Armed Forces in his June 7 order to call members of the California National Guard into federal service. A provision of Title 10, Section 12406, allows the president to deploy National Guard units into federal service. If the U.S. is invaded, there is a rebellion or danger of rebellion, or the president is unable with the regular forces to execute the laws of the United States. An 1878 law, the Posse Comitatus Act, generally forbids the U.S. military, including the National Guard, from taking part in civilian law enforcement. Section 12406 does not override that prohibition, but it allows troops to protect federal agents who are carrying out law enforcement activity. National Guard troops cannot arrest protesters, but they could protect U.S. immigration and customs enforcement, who are carrying out arrests.
The danger number one is it gives the federal government, sort of more power, more authority versus the state and local authority. We got this compromise at the constitutional founding, dividing power between local and state government and the federal government, right? And the federal government is supposed to have limited and enumerated powers. The other concern would be the chilling effect, which is that maybe people then don't want to go protest peacefully. Maybe people don't want to demonstrate and express themselves and express displeasure or disapproval, right? That's a fundamental cherished American right, which is the right to protest and exercise First Amendment rights. So I think the larger concern would be if he deploys federal troops anytime that people are protesting his policies and people are getting arrested or hurt, then maybe that has a chilling effect and makes people think twice about doing it again in the future.
The United States has long had more immigrants than any other country. The U.S. is presently home to 1/5 of the world's international migrants. These immigrants come from just about every country in the world. The foreign-born population in the U.S. reached a record 47.8 million in 2023, an increase of 1.6 million from the previous year. This is the largest annual increase in more than 20 years, since 2000. In 1970, the number of immigrants living in the US was about a fifth of what it is today. Immigrants today account for 14.3% of the US population, a roughly threefold increase from 4.7% in 1970. Let's take a look at the key immigration trends and how they have changed over time. Mexico is the top country of birth for US immigrants. Mexicans represent the largest group of migrants. Mexicans represent the largest group of immigrants living in the United States. The Mexico-US route is the largest migration corridor in the world. However, the total number of Mexican immigrants living in the US has been on the decline for more than a decade. The next largest origin groups are from India, China, the Philippines, and El Salvador. In the year 2022, Mexico was the top country of birth for immigrants who arrived in the US with about 150,000 people. Next was India with about 145,000 people, and then China, about 90,000, were the next largest sources of immigrants. Venezuela, Cuba, Brazil, and Canada each had about 50,000 to 60,000 new immigrant arrivals. The range of reasons why people move to the US from different parts of the world is diverse. Some are seeking economic opportunities, others are fleeing violence, persecution, or climate disasters. There have also been notable shifts in where these immigrants end up living. Arriving immigrants often settle in historic immigrant gateways in metropolitan areas, such as New York City, Chicago, and Boston. But for more than a decade, a much broader swath of locations in the United States have become hotspots that are home to growing immigrant populations. In 2022, most of the nation's 46.1 million immigrants lived in 4 states: California, 10.4 million, Texas, 5.2 million, Florida, 4.8 million, and New York, 4.5 million. Most immigrants lived in the South, 35%, and West, 33%. Another 21% lived in the Northeast, and 11% of immigrants lived in the Midwest. In 2022, over 30 million immigrants were in the US workforce. Lawful immigrants made up the majority of the immigrant workforce at 22.2 million. In 2023, a total of 31 million immigrants worked in the United States, making up close to 19% of the civilian workforce. In total, the US foreign-born population had a labor force participation rate of nearly 67%. As per the Bureau of Labor Statistics, or BLS, versus 62% for the native-born workforce. Immigrants and their children are projected to add about 18 million people of working age between 2015 and 2035. Immigrants contribute to overall economic growth by expanding the labor force and increasing consumer spending. According to an American Immigration Council analysis of U.S. Census Bureau data, immigrants, 48 million of whom live in the United States, generated some $1.6 trillion in economic activity in 2022. They also contributed more than $579 billion in local, state, and federal taxes. And then there are unauthorized immigrants. Undocumented or unauthorized immigrants are those living in the U.S. who entered the country without legal permission or arrived on a non-permanent visa and stayed after it expired. In 2022, about 3 million unauthorized immigrants had these temporary legal protections. Undocumented immigrants' spending power totaled more than $254 billion in 2022, and undocumented households had a combined income of $330 billion, paying nearly $76 billion in taxes. Immigrants work across a wide range of industries and occupations. Compared with those born in the United States, greater shares of immigrants work in service fields, natural resources, construction and maintenance, and production, transportation, and material moving. Each year, the United States also offers a certain number of temporary foreign worker visas, allowing U.S. employers to hire immigrants for temporary jobs. The H-2A and H-1B visas are two of the largest programs. Together, the U.S. government issued more than 576,000 such visas in 2023. U.S. President Donald Trump during the U.S. election 2024 focused on crimes committed by immigrants in the U.S. illegally as part of his argument for stricter border controls. But the data on the same consistently indicates otherwise. A growing volume of research demonstrates that not only do immigrants commit fewer crimes, but they also do not raise crime rates in the U.S. communities where they settle. In fact, some studies indicate that immigration can lower criminal activity, especially violent crime, in places with inclusive policies and social environments where immigrant populations are well established. Immigrants in the United States have had lower imprisonment rates than the native-born population since 1870. In 2020, immigrants were 60% less likely to be imprisoned than the US-born, according to a study by the National Bureau of Economic Research.
Study after study keeps on telling us that migrants, especially undocumented migrants, have a very low rate of committing crimes within the United States. They tend to be very law-abiding people who are keeping a very low profile in their host country, hoping to get a better life, and therefore comparing to the natives, studies are telling us that they have about 60% less chances to ever be convicted of a crime, including petty theft or even crossing the street on the red light. That much of a little crime is less to be committed by the so-called undocumented migrants. So, while this is definitely framed as a national security issue, it is not a national security issue as the data is showing.
Since President Donald Trump took office on the 20th of January 2025, his administration has ramped up arrests of undocumented migrants in major cities around the U.S. The president has revoked the temporary legal status of hundreds of thousands of people and expanded the power of immigration and customs enforcement to round up and remove millions of others, including criminals and those without criminal histories alike. In fact, nationwide protests now loom over Trump's upcoming military parade on the occasion of the U.S. Army birthday, that is, on the 14th of June. Massive protests have been planned in the U.S. in more than 1,500 cities. Trump warned that protesters at the parade will be met with very big force. The fact is, removal of undocumented immigrants could eliminate a key source of labor in the United States. It remains to be seen what impact will it have on the existing communities and businesses, and whether this process will transform the United States for the better.